Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today I'm going to be talking about visualizing philosophy. Okay. And in the past, I've just assumed that it is good to visualize philosophy, and I've been doing meetups on that. But this time I want to step back and talk about why. Why do you why visualize philosophy? What's the purpose of that? And then so let me just do the table of contents. So first I'm going to be talking about why visualize philosophy. Then I'm going to show you how I'm visualizing my philosophy as an illustration. Okay. And then there are three principles I'm going to be talking about, which are the core principles that I use. The form follows function is the principle that I've used for the longest time. And that's been pretty much my go-to principle whenever I need to think about anything. So in that sense, it can be just one principle. These other two principles are kind of supporting principles for me. The first one is second one is pay attention to the unknown. And third one is create your future self systematically. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about each of these principles. Then I'm going to be talking about the parallelism of these three principles. And then we're going to be talking about visualizing your philosophy. Okay, so that's the plan. Why visualize philosophy? Okay, firstly, you have to understand what philosophy is. I think philosophy is your deepest and broadest understanding of life. The most important things that you've learned. And I think that you need to be able to bring that to bear on any and every aspect of your life at will in a short period of time. So philosophy, this is a very different view of philosophy than an academic philosopher. Okay, I don't think philosophy is just for contemplation. It is not a game. It is for the purpose of doing philosophy is to live. So you're trying to develop a philosophy of life through tremendous amount of integration and induction so that you can use it. So it has to be in a form that is usable, effectively usable. That's, if you can't use your philosophy, it's useless. So what are the ways in which you can bring philosophy to bear on your life? There are many ways. Traditionally, it's been stories, the myths. When you say, okay, what would Jesus do? It's kind of personification. It holds the ideal of saying, okay, this is what you would do. So Jesus, in that sense, serves as a way of bringing everything that you need to think about to bear on whatever it is that you're doing. Great art serves the same purpose. So you have Michelangelo's David. You're saying that's what a human being can be. Another way of doing that is to hold it in principles. If you can reduce your philosophy to a few principles that you can bring to bear on any problem explicitly, that's a very powerful way of bringing your philosophy to life. My favorite way is combination of visualization and principles. I find, our visual cortex is very powerful. It is able to see many relationships and bring all those relationships to bear on a particular problem. When whenever I'm diagramming ideas, I'm able to see the relationships between them. And I use diagramming as a way of teasing out the relationships, hierarchical relationships, what needs to be included, what can be left out. I use it as a means of simplification, integration, hierarchization, all of that in preparing the diagram. And then when I'm using that diagram, it serves the purpose of a reminder of everything I need to keep in mind. It's a reminder of saying, okay, have I missed something that I need to pay attention to? So it is a way, visualization is a way of capturing everything that you need to pay attention to in a single visual element. Think of everything in a page and say, okay, everything that I care about is in this page. And you work very hard to work on that page to make it as simple and as powerful as you possibly can. And then if you do that, then that page is like is a distillation of all the work that you have done. And you are able to leverage that work. That work you could have done over years. And you're able to leverage that work in seconds on any problem. So there is always oodles of thought behind visualizations, principles, artwork. You do a lot of work to come up with a principle or to draw a diagram or to create a work of art or a story. They are simply concise forms of holding that thinking that you have done in your mind and applying it effectively. So again, the approach that I'm talking about is an application-oriented approach. Philosophy is not an end in itself. It is means to living. Now let me just jump to, I want to give an illustration of how I think about this. Now, in some ways, this is actually more complicated than I have normally thought about things. I have, for the longest time, I've just simply used that first principle of form follows function. It is a very powerful principle. I'm going to talk about it briefly, but I've done actually 2 full meetups on that. This idea comes from Louis Sulivan. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about that. And if that's all you get from this meetup, and if you get motivated enough to watch the video, so if you go to 52 Living Ideas and search for Louis Sulivan, you will see 2 meetups there. One on introduction to Louis Sulivan, where we cover, I and my friend Sherry, we cover Louis Sullivan's core idea, this form follows function. And then in the second meetup, we cover a corollary of that. And that is the problem. Any problem contains its own solution, contains and suggests its own solution, which is a more applied way of looking at this issue. So if you get interested in what I'm saying, I strongly urge you to watch those 2 meetups. Those are actually much more valuable than this meetup. So if you're watching it on video, you can pause the video here, go and watch that meetup and come back. Form follows function. So Louis Sulivan was an architect. He lived mostly in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. He's considered the father of the skyscraper. He's the father of the modern architecture. His whole idea was that he noticed that before him, the way people dealt with architecture was they looked to existing forms, whether it was Greek architecture or Roman architecture or Renaissance architecture. And they thought of building only using those forms. He says his principle, his idea was that that is wrong. You need to figure out what a function of what you're trying to build is, and you design the form to meet that function. He has written a book called Kindergarten Chats, which I recommend very highly. I liked it so much that I bought 35 copies of it and gave it to everybody whom I thought was any good. And I found something surprising that only 1/3 of people thought that it was incredible and that it just changed their life. But there were a whole bunch of people who were puzzled by what it was. And they said, "Why did you give me this? What is this?" And so I actually took the book and rewrote the whole book or edited it and made it kind of clearer and published it on the blog. It took me a year to do that. So it is of that value. It's this idea form follows function is probably the biggest idea that I know of. Um, so what is it? So this is my best short description of it. We are living beings. We live. That is our function. We create structures or forms to support our function of living. Function is the initiating pressure of a living force. Form is the resulting structure through which the function is manifested and made operative. A function creates its own form. Form ever follows the function. This law is discernible throughout nature and human works. Just as every form contains its function and exists by the virtue of it, so every function finds or is engaged in finding its form. Creating form appropriate to our functions involves undertaking the responsibility of taking the effort of creating forms. Most people on most issues simply imitate forms others have created or continue to use forms through inertia long after the function that created them have changed. Such dead forms impede functions. Living well requires identifying one's functions and choosing and creating forms that follow from those functions. Okay, this is the kind of shortest summary I could use, partly using Louis Sullivan's phrases, partly my own. Now, the diagram I like to capture is the traditional yin-yang symbol from the Chinese culture. You have one part which is a flowing part, and one part which is a more structured part, one part which is more receptive, one part which is more active. And the important thing is that they are continuously transforming each other. The function is creating its own form. The form is actually shaping how the function flows, and then the function is reasserting itself by creating. So there is a continuous rejuvenation going on of the forms and of the function. Okay. So I've chosen this as the symbol to kind of summarize that. Now, again, I'm saying that for me personally, this is the heart of philosophy for me. Form follows function, and I can just use that and bring that to bear on any problem. And at the end of this, I'm going to take a whole bunch of examples of how this works. But I want to talk about two other principles that I found very useful subsequently. Now, this is a very big idea. This is appreciation of the fact that reality, most of reality is unknown. You don't know it. And it's not even known unknown. It is mostly unknown unknown. So that I'm representing by the circle. This actually kind of is at the edge of it, edge of your known, just at the boundary of it. And we don't know the size of it. It includes everything. Knowing, acknowledging that there are things that you do not know along many, many different dimensions, including yourself, is crucial to growth because our knowledge is limited. Whatever certainty you have about your ideas, you have to know that there is, as I think I Not quoting Shakespeare exactly, but there are many things that are not there in your philosophy. They're outside of it. And you have to respect that and to be aware of that. So this is all about knowing your limits. Okay. One systematic way I have of doing that I found, which is very useful, is the Bayesian thinking. I'm hoping to do a full-fledged meeting with a full-fledged meetup with a mathematician, Stacy, on Bayesian thinking soon. Um, Bayesian thinking essentially consists of, uh, I think Sapolsky put his terms, put it best. He says it's about holding strong opinions lightly. So you have to know exactly what you think, but you have to hold it lightly, in the sense that you say, this is what I think, but you have to be open to the possibility that you may be wrong. And you have to be always looking for things. What most people have confirmation bias. They are looking for evidence that will support their position. Bayesian way of thinking is to look for evidence that would disprove your position. Always hold open the possibility that you may be wrong. That's what this is about. Another way of looking at it is that always notice your confusion. If there is something that is at the edge of your consciousness, saying that this doesn't quite add up, I'm kind of uncomfortable about it, pay attention to it, move towards it. Okay. This is all about respecting the fact that there is a lot more in reality that you do not know. So far I've been talking about the circle. What about the eye in the middle? That, I think, that is a very big principle. That's another principle that fundamentally the power that you have is the power of paying attention. That's really the only core power, the most important power that you have. That is the transformatory element, transforming element in us. So paying attention. William James puts it best. He says, will is paying attention to difficult objects. It is easy to be carried with things that are comfortable, things that are habitual. Attention is about paying attention to, is about focusing on things which are anomalous, things that are surprising, things that are unexpected. And that's where the growth potential lies. That's where the danger lies too. But both positive and negative potential is there. It kind of appears at the edge of consciousness, and quicker you pay attention to it, more you move towards it. There is a tendency people have of going away from difficult objects, from fears. This argues about going towards them. So that's the second principle. Pay attention to the unknown. So this is combining them together, combining these first two together. So there is the yin yang of form and function flowing into each other. You have to pay attention. You have to live at the border, as Jordan Peterson says, of order and chaos. You have to watch and make sure that your forms are still functional, are still appropriate to your function. You have to watch your function and make sure that it has found the proper form to fully express itself. You're standing at the border and looking to make sure that these two things are operating smoothly. That's one of the functions of attention. The second function is to know that there is this unknown surrounding this both form and function that you are operating in. And there are factors that are both positive and negative in that space. And you have to keep a watch on that. You have to be aware of that. You have to pay attention to that to make the most of the opportunities which are there in the fog, and also watch out for dangers that are there in the fog. So that is the combination of these two. There is a third principle that I think is important, and that is bringing in the time element. Jordan Peterson puts it very beautifully. He calls it the future self. You have to project your future self. You have to aim at your values. The concept of future self is very powerful. Now, the way I think about it is that I look at my future self as my child. You are trying to create your future self. You have to leave behind everything that you do not like. You have to add things that you think are important. You have to concentrate them. So I think of it as a little, smaller part in relation to me. I'm trying to kind of focus on the most essential things and leave out things that are not important. The circle around it is larger because in future there is more uncertainty. There is more unknown in the future than as compared to present. So it is all about aiming at your values. The future self, again, it's about self. So it is like your whole person you're trying to create. You're trying to say, instead of thinking of it as individual values, the fundamental creation you're creating is your own character. What is your ideal character? What do you want to be? What do you think is the best that you can be? And even thinking about that gives you a direction. Okay, so man is a being of self-made soul, and creation of your future self is the greatest creation. Everything else you will do is a consequence of that. So that's what the idea of future self is. The second part of it is systematically. Achieving a character, achieving exactly the kind of life that you want cannot be done by just haphazard actions. It cannot be done just by reacting to things around you. You need to decide what kind of action. So that yellow projection is basically disciplined action, principled disciplined action towards your values. You can also call it virtues. Virtue is basic. Value is what you're seeking, which is the future self. And virtue is how you need to act in order to get there. So this combines kind of value ethics, which is all about projecting your future self, and virtue ethics of what kind of actions will get you there. The crucial thing to remember here is that this is a long-term view. You're saying that I will get there, and the important thing is to remember the principle of compound interest, is that if you're acting virtuously, if you're doing the right things, the benefits compound. You become more and more skilled, more and more able, and the scale at which you can operate keeps rising up. So systematically is a crucial part of it. Okay, so those are the elements. So again, summarizing. So I have form follows function. Pay attention to the unknown. Create your future self systematically. I want to point out a parallelism to this, parallelism in all these three things. As I've said before, for the longest time, I've just used, form follows function as the principle. And I actually considered the other two are kind of specific applications of that principle. So your future self is your function. Your function is to create your own character. And so your function is creating your own character, paying attention to your future self. And the how is the discipline that will allow you to create that. So that's the form in time, in different processes you put together. And those are only as good only to go to the extent to which they actually serve the function. I'm also saying that the core function of a human being is to pay attention. So that's the core power that you have, core thing that you can do. And the way in which you leverage attention is by actually creating things which will support life. So you pay attention in order to create something that will create a habit or a tool or a skill that will enable you to live with less effort, less attention. So it is paying attention, automatizing things, pushing it into your subconscious skills, habitual ways of doing things, in your surroundings, in the people that you surround yourself with. So you pay attention in order to build systems that will achieve your goals. So I see there is a parallel between these three things. So now I'm going to ask you, what I've presented is just my way of holding. These are my principles. This is how I think about it. And I just wanted to present it as such. But I want to put several questions to you about, do you think it's useful to visualize philosophy? And how do you hold your philosophy? And how do you make it active in your day-to-day life? So that's one. The second one is a more, next to a more general question. So let me pause here and let me see what, what your thoughts are. So I'm going to go ahead and, so folks, I'm ready to take questions on this. I'm not sure whether I've been clear about many of these things. So I want to see if, I want to see what questions there are. So I'll take a few questions and then we can do breakout rooms. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Sure, I'm going to put up the slides. Give me a second. All right, let me check this chat here. Okay, so let's see. It's going to be Cotton, Kevin, Joe, and Paul. Cotton.
Hi, yeah, I think you asked, what do you think? You want us to answer these questions, right?
What we'll do is that I want you to answer these questions in the breakout rooms.
Oh,
Firstly,
okay.
I want the questions at the level of kind of visualizing philosophy. In terms of how do you visualize your own philosophy, what we'll do is that we'll discuss that in the breakout rooms. And then when we come back in takeaways, we can talk about that. At this point, I want to make sure that what I have said is clear about the necessity of holding the philosophy in a form in which you can apply it. If you have any questions about the principles I have talked about, I'll take those questions first. And then we will talk about, your own take on this in the breakout rooms and in takeaways.
Yeah, I don't have a question because I actually absolutely do this visualization. I'll just let others ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Katin. Look forward to hearing from you in the takeaways. Next up is Kevin. Joe and Paul. Kevin.
Thank you, Shanka. Yeah, basically, yeah, for sure, it's a help. My question is, what's the relationship between these three principles? For me, for example, I would say a future self could be, related unknown too.
Mhm.
Attention to the discipline could be, let's say, when you do discipline, you pay attention to the detail, routine, the device. Also, for the function of form relationship, could be another way around. Form, a function follows form. That's kind of internally and externally three relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. So firstly, I absolutely. I mean, these are basically like you can think of them as 6 different concepts. There is function and form, there is attention and unknown, and then there is future self and systematicness, okay, or principles. And there is relationship between all of each of them. So, for example, as you're saying, you have to pay attention to your future self. That's a very large principle in and of itself. So that means you are kind of future oriented. You're saying, where do you want to go? Instead of just saying, okay, this is where I am, you're saying, where do you want to go? What do you think is important? Okay. Similarly, so there is, as I fully agree with this, in terms of the relationship between form and function, there is a back and forth going on between form and function. But I think we are living beings, and the function comes first, in the sense that if the tendency that people have is that because form takes a lot of effort to create, people tend to hold on to forms longer than they should, even when the function that they serve no longer exists. You can see that in the traditionalist who are trying to hold on to traditions. Now, when those traditions came to be in the first place, they had a living function. And many times people hold on to the forms. This happens in institutions, this happens all over the place. That's why I think form follows function, I find to be particularly useful. Next up is going to be Joe, Paul, and Jack. Joe.
So when I visualize things and principles, I tend to look at them in frameworks and levels because then I can start to see how to measure the interactions. So one way I look at it is values. So that would be like a virtue ethic.
Mhm.
And then you'd have the principles, which would be the next level down. So then you'd say, just say for Stoicism would be the cardinal virtues. But then underneath that, you would have the interactions, so that the idea of a framework is working. So I'm trying to see how are interactions maybe captured in the kind of the circular versus like the frame kind of difference, and that's where I'm trying to see is like how those. It's not a very clear question. Is how are you capture? And in a way, Kevin's question actually kind of you answered it partly already. Is that how are the interactions really captured so that it kind of works like a funnel? That's how I visualize my philosophy. So then I know that it kind of like what ethic I'm aligning to, what principle I'm aligning to, what problem this solves, and then I looked at it as more of a frame. Is that problematic to look at it within a frame? Is it limiting or not?
I'm not sure I understand the question that well. Okay, let me try to rephrase. Let me try to put it in my words, and you
Sure.
tell me if I've gotten it. Okay.
Okay.
So I mean, one of the things that you're saying is that there is a hierarchy of things. That there is virtue ethic. That okay, you need to have virtue ethic. Then you have these 4 cardinal virtues, which actually implements that virtue ethic. And
Right.
then there is interaction into which you bring those virtues to bear. So with that, there is a very clear hierarchy of principles that you're using. And absolutely, hierarchies are critical. The thing that I like about something like the form follows function is that it's a very it's like a universal function. It's like it's a tool which I can bring to bear on anything. So I can say, okay, I've been presenting this meetup, right? I'm trying to, what form am I using? I'm trying to actually communicate how I think. The function is that I'm trying to communicate how I think about philosophy and how I use the visuals in order to capture my philosophy and to use my philosophy. So that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I'm saying, okay, is this the proper form to do it or not? And how do I need to kind of, modify the form? So my first version of this presentation, I thought I went too fast. I was not clear in kind of communicating the function, the elements were not connected to what I was trying to do. So this time I decided, okay, I need to spend a lot more time on what is the purpose of it. The purpose being that philosophy is your most broadest generalizations. And the function of all these diagrams is to make those broadest generalizations alive in your day-to-day life, in your not just life as a whole, but at any moment, being able to bring that to bear on any moment. And then I said, okay, I also noticed that different people operate differently. So for example, for some people, holding it in form of a principle is a more powerful way of doing that.
Right.
For some people, holding it in form of a actual character, whether a real person or a person from a myth or a story, is a very powerful way of holding it. So I wanted to say, okay, these are the various ways of accomplishing the same thing. But what I'm arguing for is that you need to do that. You need to think as broadly as possible and as deeply as possible, but then you need to bring all of that to bear on whatever it is that you're doing. Okay, so we'll continue this, Joe.
Yes.
And
I was
I like all the diagrams that that I've, thank you for sending me the diagrams. I really like going through them, because the thing is that it's always good to kind of compare whatever visualizations you have with somebody else's visualizations and say, okay, what am I missing? What is this? Is this added? And you're relentlessly trying to compact as much value and as much thought into your visualization as you can. And you're trying to keep it, so it's a question of concentration. Keep it simple and keep it as comprehensive. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Next up is Paul, followed by Jack. Paul.
Hi, yeah. I'm looking at your visualization and it means something to me, but I want to know if that's what you meant. So can I ask a question of that nature?
Please.
Okay, so it's sort of daring, I think, and almost brazen of you to put the yin yang symbol in there. And I love it in that, but it makes me think it's about, you're including in your thought the dialectic. So that could be yin, that could be being, non-being, that could be male, female, that could be matter versus nothingness, all those cases where there's that dialectic. So did you mean something big like that? Or do you just want to say, this is form follows function, and this is form, and this is function, and that's what I meant? Do you see what I'm saying?
Very good. Very good question. Maybe one thing is that I've separated some things out. So for example, I have separated the unknown out as a ring outside it. The way I'm seeing it is that the yin yang is actually part of what you are familiar with, that you are working with, some things which are clearer. See, this is like, you can think of it as your unconscious and your conscious. But there is stuff outside it too. And the I think adding the attention, the I in the middle, is particularly important to me, because that is where you're saying that it's not just that it flows into one another, but the power of attention, the ability of paying attention is really crucial. It's really the heart of what you can do to really transform things. And that is done both in making sure that the dance between form and function happens well, but it is also keeping an eye on the possibilities that are at the edge of your consciousness. So I have separated out those two. So in that sense, it's like a double dance, right? There is a circular dance going on between form and function, but there is also axial dance going on between the center, which is the awareness, and the unknown. So it's like it's the same thing happening in two different dimensions. So the red and blue is the forms that you have set in motion and that you are working with. Whereas a lot of the change that is going to come through the actual movement. So it's like it's trying to capture both those things together. Thank you, Paul. Great question. Next up is going to be Jack, followed by Jory. Jack. Go ahead.
We're mostly discussing behaviors. So I don't know if it's completely relevant, but I do think that ideas influence behaviors. So it would be interesting to see what like a critical race theory scholar would have to say about this, especially considering all the references to Jordan Peterson. But the point is that what if some people deny real experiences of other people? And the denial is very harmful. Like I mentioned, the Holocaust, and like even today, there's people who deny like COVID and like health research and science. There's people who deny science and history in general. How do you, is the Bayesian thinking of like constantly looking for different perspectives actually irrelevant at some times?
So you're saying, what if people are denying obvious facts of reality? How do I deal with them? Is that what you're asking?
I don't think I would consider them obvious, but yes, facts.
I don't think I have anything to offer them,
Okay.
Jack. So I will just say thank you, see you, have a good life, something like that. So
I get it might be like a question of moral philosophy, and because I think to understand these people isn't ignorant of us to say, oh, they're just crazy.
No. I mean, the thing is that I will let them be. That's my answer. Next up is going to be Jory, and then Claudio. Jory.
Hi. So I put down in the chat a question of mine: is form follows function similar to first principles thinking? Someone did give me a response that was very interesting.
Let me go ahead and answer that. Okay, I'll go ahead and try to answer that question. So form follows function, and I'm always happy to talk about that because that's my favorite principle by my favorite thinker, Louis Sulivan. He talks about, his autobiography is called Autobiography of an Idea. And the reason he calls it that is that this is a function, this is a principle, which is culmination of all his thought. So it is like he's reflecting on life and coming up with that, and that serves as a starting point. So think of it, it's like a funnel, it brings everything together, everything that he knows, and then everything that he does kind of proceeds from it. And that's what a fundamental principle looks like. It's a tremendous integration of enormous amount of observations. And then it serves as a first principle. So it's not first principle in the sense that you start with it first, but it actually is it is an integration. It is induction arrived at through a lot of work. And then it serves as a starting point for thinking about things. So it is first principle in that sense. So it's like the kind of the central point of a funnel, or like an hourglass shape. It brings everything together, all the observations together, all the input that you have taken in about the world, and serves as the starting point for all the output that you're putting out in the world.
I wanted to say I love your graphics. I love the eyeball projecting the future self. It's very clear, nicely done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that, Shuri. Next up is Claudio. Claudio, go ahead. Okay, let me see. Okay, next up is Betty.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
hello there. Oh, hello.
Let's
Speaking.
yeah, Betty, go ahead, and then Claudio. Betty, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I was just wondering when you said that we hold on to forms when they no longer serve a function. Are you talking about how we attach ourselves and we don't want to let go of things because of loss aversion?
Yes, and it happens along many axes. It happens as let me just quickly let me try to just talk about many. Like one of them is habits. You develop habits and you start operating in a habitual way, even when those habits are no longer serving you. It is about gathering of things that you no longer need. It is continuing to remain with people who kind of are no longer supporting where you're going and are harmful to you. It is holding on to tradition even when you know that there are things that you're not happy with, except that doing any change would require tremendous amount of effort. So what happens is that in order to build a form and to create new form, it takes a lot of effort. It involves a lot of risk. It involves firsthand thinking. It involves letting go of a level of comfort. And for all of these reasons, people hold on to forms. And most people hold on to forms that are created by other people, which they themselves have not created, and they just go with that. It takes tremendous amount of courage to live firsthand, to ask the questions firsthand, to make the changes that are needed as you see evidence from life. So that's what I mean.
But there's something about us that naturally attaches ourselves to forms in the first place, which makes it difficult to let go, even when it's time to let go.
I mean, part of it is just simply habit, and part of it is our, another way of thinking about it is system 1 and system 2. And this is not bad, okay? Firstly, I want to stress that it's not bad that we are dependent on forms. The purpose of attention, purpose of effortful creation is to create forms so that the patterns of action that are supporting your life become automatized, and you depend on that. So your attention is now freed to do something higher or something different. So forms are critical. I'm not saying anything against form. I think forms are critical, but the function that they serve is that they free up attention to go to the next level. So it is a way of actually relentlessly automatizing good, kind of paying attention to find something good, automatizing it into your life, both in terms of your subconscious, your physical habits, your surroundings, the people that you surround with, the systems that you create, and then going to the next thing. But as you're doing this, so that's why forms are important part of living. That's the only way functions can scale up. But that eye needs to be there all the time. That attention needs to be there all the time. You have to be prepared when necessary to reevaluate the forms, to and to recreate them. Thanks, Betty. Next
Thank you.
is Claudio.
Oh, thank you. Very interesting topic, but not easy to grasp. Earlier, you mentioned function and Bayesian thinking. Function creating your own character and Bayesian thinking, trying to avoid confirmation bias, right? The face of counter evidence. You may have already answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. Would it be very difficult for people who hold culturally held beliefs, like they're going into a belief system, let's say, for instance, faith-based beliefs, to use this particular approach? And would it be difficult also for scientists? Because in a way, there can be confirmation bias even in the scientific arena. So, what are your thoughts on that?
I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. So are you saying, no, can you repeat your question? I just want to make sure I get it.
Okay, I'll try to, in other words, like you mentioned function, creating your own character. It's like your own self, like your new self. So that in a way that implies like shedding your old self. So would it be difficult for people who are born into a particular culture that has their own belief systems, let's say Christianity, because they would have to kind of like, in a way, eliminate some of those particular beliefs, if not all of them. So I believe you already answered that, though.
So let me answer that. And you're saying the same thing about scientists. So I would say, actually, this phenomena of future self is a very old phenomena, and that is there. In fact, the purpose of the religions, the old religions, was to project a future self. When you say, what would Jesus do? Or basically it is saying, be like Jesus. That's my future self. That's another way of putting it. It's all about, future self is all about projecting a moral ideal. And similarly for a scientist, you are trying to project your own, like we are going to do a meetup on this, about people think of scientists as people who know. That's actually false. Scientists are people who are trying to know, who are trying to ask questions. So the hallmark of a scientist is to keep asking questions. Once they have figured something out, they are on to the next question. So the issue of the kind of unknown and known is a very crucial part of being a scientist. You are actually trying to pay attention to things that are at the edge of what you know, and you're trying to make things more and more conscious. So the ideal in case of scientists would be an epistemological ideal of saying that always remain open, always ask questions, something like that. But so what I'm saying is the idea of future self is applicable across cultures and has been the case for throughout human history. Even at a more primitive level, the way actual people served as their future self. I want to grow up to be like my father, let's say. Somebody in a tribe says, I want to be like the leader of the tribe. Those are the characteristics I want. That is also a way of projecting a future self. But a great question. Next up is Roxanne, followed by Jeff. Roxanne.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. I'm just to put it in the context of form follows function. It's kind of like what you're saying is, so you're building this building. So if I'm visualizing my future self and I have my foundations and I have my belief systems, you're kind of saying, this is so simple. You guys are way much smarter than me, but to kind of leave floors open to fill them with the unknown or something that might enhance it. Because sometimes I struggle with that, with keeping my ideals and what I finally believe at 61 years old and really want and how I feel, and then being sidetracked by all the unknowns. It's life, but it's also disconcerting a little bit. So how do you do that? Keep a hold of your forms, and so that way you can build what you want and not let so many things sidetrack you. Does that make sense?
So I hear you asking two things. One thing is to say that how do you handle the openness, in the sense that how do you remain open? Okay, so let me take that as a question. Let me try to answer that one. The first is that it is very hard, partly because our automatic faculties, our emotions, yearn for certainty. They want to say, this is the answer. Give me answer, any answer, and I hold on to it, even in spite of evidence to the contrary. That's the nature of our emotional mechanism, our subconscious yearning for certainty. Now, life is complex, and there is genuinely things that come out of the blue, both positive and negative. Again, I want to emphasize that most people, when they think about the unknown, they always think of the negative, but the positive too is part of the unknown. There is upside in the potential. And what happens is that the system one is actually feels very good too, because it is automatic. You're automatically reacting. You are operating in a context which is comfortable. Whenever you are open to the unknown, you have to be okay with being uncomfortable, or you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is what is needed. But all growth comes from there, because all growth comes from going beyond whatever it is that you're comfortable with. So it is effort intensive. It is something that has a negative valence. But what happens is that once you've been doing it again and again, the emotional reaction changes. The failures don't feel like you are defeated. You're saying, oh, that did not work. Also, at the best, you develop a sense of adventure, where you actually yearn for adventure rather than security.
You just described my life, so.
Wonderful. Thank you, Roxanne. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be Jeff and Lisa. Jeff.
So Roxanne, first of all, I just want to tell you how much I love the idea of leave several floors undesigned. That's a really, or vacant or empty or whatever. I think that's great. So Shrikant, I think this is a very elegant presentation, and I want to thank you for it. I just want to make just a couple short observations. One is, I have discovered, surprisingly, that quite often the best way to discover form is to start with identifying desired functions, and whether it's sort of asking people, what do you want, and then considering, well, why do you want that? You know, in its simple, in its simplest, and then that often yields different functions that one might set about achieving. And now, interestingly enough, what it also begins to yield, starting off with that kind of specific to the general rather than the general to the specific, is what happens is you are sort of envisioning where you'd like to go. You know, where the whole begin with the end in mind, sort of where you'd like to end up, what it is that you think you're trying to achieve, whether it's with regard to your character or with regard to you know, specific things. But in some ways, I end up with the core of it all is this holding strong opinions lightly, is with this constant not only acceptance but really appreciation of the what I have discovered constantly within life, of discovering things that were previously unknown unknowns.
Thank you.
And it's why I hold primary the combination of caring and curiosity. Because if I didn't care, it wouldn't matter. But unless I hold on to curiosity in terms of even what form I wish, I mean, what function I wish, because I've seen that evolve, along with what functions might get me there, along with the character that I'm trying to develop and the things that go along with it, unless I start with caring and curiosity and hold that place, then the rest of it doesn't happen. And I'll just give you one little analogy. They asked Ben Hogan, one of the greatest golfers who ever played, how tightly should you hold the club? And he said, hold it as if you were holding a small bird in your hands. Tightly enough so the bird doesn't fly away, but not so tightly that you kill the bird.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of an interesting statement of hold strong opinions lightly.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. So, I mean, the core thing is that it's the kind of future self which drives you. Of, you know, when you're asking why, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? And that's a very, you know, I mean, when I use the principle form follows function, it is all about relentlessly coming back to your functions. It is because what happens is that even the process of asking that question, why repeatedly, even if you have asked it even a moment ago or the day ago or a decade ago, re-asking that question, you're actually going to discover something new. Because the way in which our mind works is that it is relentlessly converting a given function into forms. And those forms are getting older and they're getting more connected to the context in which they were developed. Asking the same question again and again allows you to crystallize your purpose. It allows you to actually put more color into this future self, understanding in a more essentialized way. Keep throwing away things, kind of, I think removing things is as critical as adding things. And it's a continual process. And it may seem like too much effort, but that's what life is. You know, it's kind of relentlessly saying, you know, what is my function? What do I care about? What are my values? What is the future self? And asking that repeatedly keeps you focused on doing what you need to do. Next up is going to be Alyssa. Alyssa, go ahead.
Sure, Colin.
Hi.
So
Nice
I
to
know
meet you.
it's been a while.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for walking us through your personal philosophy. I know that you've talked about how you've created principles and distilled principles for yourself, as well as created a visualization from those principles to accompany them. And I was curious how you arrived at those principles at all, and if you've any recommendations for how each of us can develop our own independent principles.
Okay, great question. So for me, what I did was that I cheat. I look at all the great thinkers, anybody whom I think, not just great thinkers, great people, and I try to learn from them. And I try to formulate what they are saying in my own words. And I try to combine all of that. If I have to recommend one person to you, it would be Louis Sulivan in the form follows function. And we've done actually a very good way. I cheated. I got my friend Sherry to accompany me to do this meetup on Louis Sulivan. And it's a fantastic introduction to him. What you learn from him is not just his ideas, but a certain approach to ideas, certain kind of being alive to life, being alive to ideas, being it's a process of relentless integration. So you need kind of combination of kind of curiosity and openness and structuredness. And so you're kind of looking at things and you're structuring them, and then you're restructuring them and restructuring them. And it keeps on evolving. All these ideas that I have, all these visualizations I have keep evolving all the time. And it is in that process of evolution of ideas. Well, firstly, one of the things we're talking about was art. On Saturdays, we discuss art. And people were saying, oh, I started doing art and I noticed that it was not as good as the masters. So I stopped. Okay. Now, the point there is that you have to realize that the masters spend a lot of time on that. So the biggest suggestion I have is to just relentlessly keep thinking, and trying to do this. And all of this are results of it. And try to pick up as many good tools, evaluate the tools from as many different sources, keep on simplifying them. So keep on kind of absorbing as much as possible and organizing it. So it's like a living process. So that's what that's what I do. That's what I would recommend. Great question, Alyssa. Next up is going to be Laura. Laura, go ahead. What's your question?
Well, I don't know the question so much as you described what it is for me to paint a painting,
Mm-hmm.
The processes that not exact, but it's very much similar to me, what I go through every time I paint a painting.
Absolutely. And it is very close to the, the creation of art, because essentially what are you trying to do in art, right? So this is, we're doing a meetup on art on Saturdays. So what you're trying to do in art is that you're trying to capture your philosophy in a visual way, or, whether it is visual art or music or literature. But let's take the visual arts. What you're trying to do is that you're trying to capture everything that you think about your philosophy and making it real, so that when you look at it, you actually see your philosophy concretized. That's what you're trying to do in a great work of art. And it is very much similar to what you're doing. And I tweak all the proportions, all the colors, all the relationships relentlessly to capture things just so. So absolutely. So folks, what we are going to do now is I'm going to start the breakout rooms. And the question for the breakout rooms, let me bring up the share screen again. The question for the breakout rooms is, do you think it is useful to visualize philosophy? How do you actually hold your philosophy and how do you actually use it? Can you visualize your philosophy? And what did you learn today? So we'll do breakout rooms, and then we will come back into this room to share our takeaways, and I'll take any other questions that you may have. So I'm starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. So it's time for takeaways and for any other questions that you have. So you get to talk about your takeaways. What are you walking away with? What did you learn today? What are you walking away with? What are your takeaways? That's one. And second, if you have any more questions, you can go ahead and ask questions. So I'm going to take it by voluntary. So you can go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have any takeaways or any questions. Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, just really quickly, and just cleared things up for me about how elegant the picture actually was, and how thinking about things in layers wouldn't necessarily yield what you're trying to communicate. And the power of simplicity when you're drawing something visual, that, you know, you put your ideas down on paper, you have to reduce it to its most pure form, and that communicates something that you're allowed to, or not allowed, you're able to get to the core principles of what matters most. So the elegance, I had a new appreciation for the elegance of the picture that you drew with Anne's comments. So in our breakout room, and that also cleared up a lot of other things. There was also there were also things about visual philosophy that we got into, but I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. Next up is Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Frank. Good effort. I know you spend lots of time. So we, as the audience, we need to catch up your pace. It's like actually I compare to from the system south. You used to be like from a function follows form. There's the picture, the external, and subjective, objective. You know that. From that part, would you from that begin? They go to Uber's, right, for unknown. Now today use the circle. I would have another session. You can about your thinking journey kind. How do you make a step-by-step move from that picture to another picture to this picture? Okay. More simple, yeah. That's going to, because we follow through you. When we see you today, every time it's new. Intentionally we try connect. How connected them? That's why Joy and me come same question.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. So let me answer that. I mean, I think what happens is that I'm trying to bring things together relentlessly. So I'm actually using these things to think, and I'm trying to fix. So for example, I'm trying to achieve many things through what I'm doing with visuals. So for example, you're referring to the 4 function diagrams I had. I found that to be extremely useful. But what I found was that this one is more dynamic than the 4 function diagram. And the 4 functions, what I found was that, when I'm thinking about in 4 functions, like you have the inside and outside axis. And what I found is that the concepts of form and function go across both inside and outside. So I don't need to separate them out while thinking about it. I can just mentally think about it inside and outside. So it's, the diagrams. So diagrams are only one part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is what is going on inside your head. So you're trying to kind of come up with a diagram that produces the maximum productive thinking and productive reflection as a result of it. And you're relentlessly trying to improve it. And like Leonardo has had this term called excellences upon excellences. You're trying to pack as much into things as possible and to create as big an impact on yourself as you as you go along. So thank you very much. Great observations. Next up is going to be Betty and Alyssa. Betty.
Yeah, hello everybody. I really like the idea of using your future self or thinking of your future self as your child. I think that that's quite a powerful idea. But what we discussed in the group was that even if we don't have an explicit idea of what our philosophy is, everybody has an implicit idea. And I thought that it's really good to be reminded to have a deliberate, conscious idea of what your philosophy is, so that you're creating your future self as to be who you want to be rather than who you've just become. And I think at the heart of it all is values.
Absolutely. Great observation. And so let me talk a little bit about the implicit philosophy and explicit philosophy. That's a very deep point. Whether we like it or not, we have an implicit philosophy. And many people's implicit philosophy can be better than their explicit philosophy. And some people's explicit philosophy is better than their implicit philosophy, because but it is important to make your philosophy as explicit as you can, because the more explicit it is, the more you're able to change it, more you're able to reflect upon it, to correct things. If it is implicit, so I want to say a couple of things about implicit and explicit. One part of it is that even an explicit philosophy, you have to make it automatized. So you have to kind of make it a part of you. If you say that, if verbally you say something, okay, this is how I should be, and if your actions do not match that, then those have not been automatized yet. So all good parts of your explicit philosophy have to be automatized, should be automatized. And so that's one part of it. The second thing is that consciously you have to be watching for your implicit philosophy of saying, what am I actually doing? What am I actually pursuing? Okay. And learning from that. Seeing, so there is this loop going on between implicit and explicit. Another way of thinking about it is the yin and yang, the explicit mind and the automatized mind, the kind of reactive mind. So there is a reactive part and active part, and they are kind of building on one another. But the hallmark of it is that the more aware you are, the more you know what your implicit philosophy is. And then you can shape it the way you want. But great observations. Thank you. Next up is Alyssa, Jyoti, and Andrew. Alyssa.
So Betty actually framed that a lot better than I was about to. But my takeaway was from the group was at least there's obviously a lot more work to be done in taking those implicit philosophies and verbalizing them into something explicit. But there was a question from one of the other members from the group. If you don't mind clarifying or outlining actions or applications, what those look like as you're taking your philosophy and applying it.
Okay, so let's take. You want to say you're asking, how do I use this, right? That's what you're asking. Okay.
Yeah, that was the question the group had.
Sure. Okay, so let's take a concrete problem that I'm working on. I'm saying, okay, what do I need to do with the meetups? These meetups, 52 Living Ideas meetup for 2021. What is my future self? What is our future self? What is it? So in order to do that, I have to continuously keep asking, what is the function? What is the function of these meetups? What is it to me? What is it to everybody here? Why is it important? So first thing I did is I'd say, okay, look, I can try to put my own take, but I need to find out from others, what is it that they are walking away with? Because I want to make sure that the thing that keeps all these people bringing, keeps them bringing, coming back here, I want to know that explicitly as best as I can. There may be some aspects of it that I don't know. So that is one part of kind of making sure that their functions are fully incorporated in my plan of what I'm going to do. Then I'm saying, okay, it's looking very good, but how can it be better? So it's a kind of explicit way of saying the future self has to be better. there is no way you can simply say, oh, this is nice, and just remain there. Because the moment you do that, you start dying. It starts to die. So you have to keep on explicating. So one of the things I got from it is one part of it is my personal growth, that I want to grow as fast as possible. And I found that making presentations is the fastest way of growing. So I'm doing more presentations like this one. Okay, so that is one application of it. The second application is that the quality of ideas matter. So the more quality ideas that I can inject into this, it is going to grow. So what I'm doing is that I'm reaching out to every author that I know whom I think is good. And I'm happy to report to everybody that in my first try, I just started this for the new year. I made a list of 25 authors. Unfortunately, 8 of them I found were dead. So I can't get them back here. But of rest of them, I said, okay, I'm going to try to reach out to 4 and see what the result is. And I'm happy to report that 3 of them are coming too. So what is going to happen is that content is important. So I'm getting fresh, new content at a much deeper level. I'm also working on, I find that the regular series that we have is very powerful, like the series that Claire is doing, John is doing, Chase is doing, is fantastic. So I'm adding to that. So Shelly, who's a regular here, she's doing a new series on that. So I'm continuing. So this is a way in which I kind of step back, look at the functions. I try to project in terms of the discipline, systematic part. I'm planning. So for example, in case of authors, instead of just coming by the authors, that in some way, I'm systematically saying, okay, let me look at my entire library and see who is it that I respect. And I'm trying to get all of them. So it's like I'm trying to be more systematic in pursuing it. So things like that. So those are some of the examples applied to this. Thanks. Great question, Alyssa. Next up is Jyoti, Andrew, and Paul. Jyoti.
Yeah, this was a very good representation of the 3 principles. I like the last one too, that you had done the 4 forms, the principles. I like this one too. I parallel this with writing a thesis or dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a research principle. These are research principles, and they would have been very useful to me when I was coming up in this country, and I had to drop some my culture taboos from my culture and pick up some from new values from here, and put them all together to bring myself up to for the future. So I found that very useful. And the only thing that I was telling other people in the breakout room was the attention to the beyond, unknown. I personally have a tendency to bring my personal experiences, my intuitions, and then I also have a good ability to sit back and say, but that was then. Now I have to pick up, this is a different situation. Now I have to pick up something different and just investigate a little bit what is out there that I can use that for my personal growth. So I use very succinctly to put it all together for everyone to see. But I enjoyed that. I'm not a visualization person, but I think it is automatic with me in my head. But drawing the diagrams, I think that's an excellent idea. That I'm not at the stage of my life and I can do all that, but I'm taking all this for my children now. Thank you very much. This was very beneficial.
Thank you, Jyoti. Really appreciate that. Next up is Andrew and Paul. Andrew.
Yeah, hi, thanks. All right, a few things. One, you just mentioned that you find making presentations the best way and the fastest way for you to grow. And I'm so glad you said that, because that's a good reminder to me. I think that works for me also, because then you realize it's kind of like almost analogous to drawing these conceptual models, these visualizations. It's by going through the exercise of trying to express it where you realize that they're, you know, what's missing, what do I need to refine, and so forth. So thank you for saying that. Also, a good reminder here is your statement about the most important power we have is the power of paying attention. Great reminder for me. Finally, I'm similar to you. It looks like I'm a big fan of conceptual models, and I do a lot of, I express my conceptual models visually with, you know, figures and diagrams and so forth. And I just want to say, for those, what I find is not everybody obviously is, you know, is into the visualizations, where they, I think, in that manner. And I found that similar to journaling, there's something about the process of kind of just going through this iterative step, whether it be kind of sketching, starting out your drawing, or writing. It just elicits things in your mind that you didn't even know were there. So for those people who are like thinking, yeah, I'm not a drawer, or things like that, if you don't feel like that, just start writing stuff. And you don't even need to actually know what you're writing. You almost like don't even need to know what you're thinking. It's really wild. Just start like writing stuff, and stuff pops out. It's phenomenal. So anyway, thanks.
Excellent. So I want to build on that. That's a great observation. So I'm a big fan of writing. So I have journals. When I moved, I tried to, they were all sitting in the boxes. And when I moved, I put them in a bookshelf, and I have a whole bookshelf. So I have like 200 journals, I think 40,000, 50,000 pages written over all these years. So I'm a big fan of writing. So one of the things writing does, and it's the same thing with drawing, is that it takes what's going on in here and puts it out there. Okay. It's externalization. And what the externalization does is that you're able to look at it. See, you cannot think and think about thinking at the same time. Whereas once you put it out there, it is external, and you can look at it and you can say, have I captured everything I need to capture? Is this precise enough? Is it clear enough? How is it related to other things? And in that process, it actually, it builds your self-reflection. So for example, on these presentations, I do one presentation a week. And I start the presentation of saying, okay, what's the most challenging thing that I can do presentation on this week? And I start off a PowerPoint right away. And I keep working on the PowerPoint day after day in glances, in the sense that whenever I have some time, my mind is automatically working on it. I will go and modify a little thing. I would go ahead and add some bullet points. And that process of having something external that you are relentlessly working and perfecting is the perfect way of using your mind. Because what it does is that our mind is very complex. And the first thing that you utter, there is actually a lot more thing behind that. And once it is outside, you can bring the layers. Because the first layer is outside, you can bring the second layer outside. And then you can bring the third layer outside. And then you can, so whatever you produce becomes richer and richer, simply because you're doing it outside of you. So it's a great point. Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Paul.
Yeah, thanks. There's a, I saw a lecture once about the sort of spiritual word Om, and the point being made was, in some branches of religion and philosophy, there's this concept that that word is the universe, not that it sort of is something that's, you get to think bigger from it, or you get to experience, it is it, like the word is it. So my point is, applying your form follows function to your visualization, I'm wondering if you think of the diagram that you might make, which was beautiful, as being the philosophy, or might there be 100 diagrams, one when you're trying to explain the concept to somebody else, one when you're trying to relate a person to the outside world, I took my own notes, one when you're trying to find a guide, show a guide for how to use the concepts, one when the audience is you trying to get inspired Like I would want the future self, if I made such a diagram, to be this sparkly thing, one where you're just trying to present an overview. What is the underlying your thoughts about all that?
Sure. Wonderful. Wonderful. Great question. So first thing I want to say is that I want to make a distinction between map and territory. Okay. I never forget that these are all maps. These are maps trying to capture the territory. Okay. And the territory is where all the action is. Okay. This is my best capturing right now. This is a map that allows me to access the territory and explore the territory well. I'm continuously working on the map. So this is just my version. After this meetup, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to find, oh, you know what? If I did this, it will do this more. So I'm relentlessly working on it. But at every point, I'm very much aware that this is a map. You can never forget that. It's a form of remembering the unknown, that there is unknown reality. There is a lot of unknown things, and you are trying to capture things, but you know that there is more. So that's one point. Second, absolutely, there are maps for everything. So for example, in many ways, just that circle and the eye and this thing and the circle surrounding it, I wanted to just hold on to that because that has such a unity to it. In some ways, that the arrow going out seems to distract me from the unity of the yin yang and the eye and the circle. So I've been working very hard. I've come up with many different ways of saying, how do I achieve movement at the same time, the stability of this? So for different purposes, you have to keep transforming. So think of these things as forms which are malleable, that you're working with for different purpose. And even for yourself, you are saying, for this, I need this. For this, I need this. For this, I need this. And definitely for communicating with other people, you use different things. In some cases, it can be so simplified for you because you automatically make connections using that diagram, but that may not be as universal. So you're kind of trying to see, and part of it is kind of testing it out, give a meetup and say, okay, here is my diagram. What do you guys think? And then people say, oh, no. And people actually will send me, will say, you know what? My diagram looks like this. What do you think? And then I say, okay, what is good about this? And what is, what is this effective at? So all of this is a way of kind of coming up with all kinds of maps in order to deal with the territory. And depending on what you're trying to do, the map is different. Absolutely. Great point. All right, folks, let me see. Does anybody else had, let's see, I think Barry had unmuted and Mark. Barry, do you have anything?
Yes, I want to follow up with what the last meetup I went with you and the fellow from the ASCC Institute.
Yes.
And how it dovetails with what you're talking about.
Please.
So what I learned from that is that I've been all my life, but more so since my wife died, on a spiritual journey. And I have concluded that my children and my parents and other people that I've had conflict with, they're on a material journey. And the two are incompatible. They're like the yin and the yang you talk about. And my spiritual journey, I have a future me to be a better person of me, to be in harmony with my environment, to be in harmony with myself. And so can I finish with a poem?
Please.
Real quick?
Sure.
So this is a condensation of my life in a less than a minute poem. It's called, in high school, I took the path of studying hard to be a polymath, but my parents wanted me to socialize, while my hormones said sexualize. My polymath self wanted to actualize. I tried to do all three. This caused me much difficulty. 60 years later, under this all came to an end when my wife died and I lost my best friend, and I could no longer see my grandchildren. That's when I entertained my polymath whim. I had no choice but to die or win. I took on my true form and rose above the storm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. Appreciate that. And the point, let me connect it as you were doing with the presentation on Sunday from Michael Conforti, Dr. Michael Conforti of the Assisi Institute. If you did not attend it, please, that's one of the best presentations I've seen at our meetup here. It was about the voice of psyche, who is knocking at the door. And this is all about the unknown. This is about paying attention to the unknown, of saying what are the anomalous things, what are the things, what is at the edge of your consciousness. Look at it, pay attention to it, because that is where both the positive and the negative potential, that's where the potential is, and be open to that. So that's what the meetup is about. So, okay, I think Mark, you had unmuted. Do you have something?
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say, it's interesting that your whole discussion tonight was about, in your philosophy, had to do with the relationship between form following function. And it just so happens that about 3, 4, or 5 months ago, I've been contemplating that relationship, because it's very popular with the Bauhaus and other, I forget, so, it's probably before the Bauhaus, I forget, but some other great philosophers would talk about that relationship, and it became like form followed function. So I was thinking about it more deeply, and then I realized it's not really true that form follows function, but on the deeper level, you could even say that function follows form, on the deepest, most metaphysical level. And the reason is this, is like, if you take something, nothing can come from nothing, and there has to be some essence. There has to be something that's eternal. And therefore, and it has a function. We know it has a function.
Mark, let me interrupt for a second. I mean, the thing is that the form follows function is a very specific, like the idea of form that you're using. Form is a word that refers to things which are very different from each other. So, for example, what you're probably alluding to is like Plato's forms. This actual formulation, what I would recommend is that you should read the original, which is from Louis Sulivan. He's the one who came up with this idea. So Bauhaus took this idea from Louis Sulivan. So what I would recommend is that please read that, because otherwise the discussion is going to rotate around the meaning of the word form. And there are so many different meanings associated with it that it will dilute people's kind of understanding of what I have said by confusing it with kind of completely different meanings of forms. Like, for example, Plato uses the form, like the eternal thing that you're talking about, in a very, very different way. And there it would be completely different. So then the meaning, because the word itself is meaning something else, it's a completely different relation. So again, kind of talking about map and territory, words are maps, and what we are really talking about territory. So form as a map is referring to two completely different things. So it will get very confusing for people if we do that. But I would be happy, I would recommend reading, Louis Sulivan himself on that, because he's the one who came up with that. And then I'll be happy to discuss this with you, sir.
Because I see that the relationship is dialectical between form and function. That's how I've analyzed it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Bowden, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see three areas of tension between a broad organizing framework, like, let's say, for example, if your values are learning and teaching, and that would include a lot of elements. But if you have a narrow organizing framework, that I'm a particular teacher obsessed with a particular cause, that would be a narrow organizing framework. So once again, there's a tension between those two always, which one how do you narrow yourself, or how do you broaden yourself? And that's the question. A second one is inductive versus deductive. I mean, we discover ourselves inductively by looking at patterns of our goals and projects, and then we discern personality, or we deductively, come up with a project or perfect self or ideal self and try to implement it. So once again, there's a tension there between those two polarities. There's also the givenness of the meta-narrative, which people used to live under. Now, the opposite is true. We are self-created and self-actualizing, and we in a sort of existential self. So we have another tension that has been operating, and only recently throughout history. So I see these three tensions always operating in our decisions.
Excellent. Thank you, Gordon. Appreciate that. So I would say a couple of things. So firstly, the way in which the form follows function. I mean, that's the primary principle that I'm using. It deals with that. It starts with a very general principle. It's like the way in which Louis Sulivan talks about it is that he says, I've discovered after a lot of trial and error that it's only the general principles which are the most universal principles which are the most useful. So he says that it's surprising how many other principles can be converted into universal principles. And so on one hand, he's trying to be broad and general, but on the other hand, it's a principle that can be applied recursively to even narrow areas of saying, what is the function of this? And then what is the sub-functions that make it possible? And then going into kind of forms of it. So I find that the way I think about it is that this is a scalable function. It goes from the broadest to the narrowest. The way in which, Buckminster Fuller talks about it is that macro comprehensive and micro incisive, so at the same time. And this is the kind of the very unusual and powerful feature of this particular principle. The second thing is that the inductive and deductive, there is always a dance going on. You're trying to take in things, it's trying to see patterns on it, and then whatever you learn from it, you're trying to kind of deductively apply it. While you're doing that, you're doing induction again. So it's both, the way I see it is that in the living process, both these kind of provide feedback for each other. The induction process provides a feedback for the, kind of creates a place from which you deduce, and then the deductions that you make, you induce from it again to do a check. The deduction actually applies the results of induction to see whether they actually work. So there is a dance going on. So there is absolutely, there is this kind of cyclical thing going on. All right, folks. So this has been amazing. Thank you very much for all these great comments and questions.